This is Dr. Walter Johnson dictating at his home in Homer, Alaska on December 2nd, 1990. This is an introduction to a tape interview done with Ludwig Ost at the Pioneer Home in Anchorage on November 17th, 1983 by myself. I first met Ludwig Ost in Marshall, Alaska in the spring of 1955 when I was there doing a medical clinic. He was about 70 years old at that time. We did not meet again until the early 1980s when we were both living in Anchorage. He in the Pioneer Home and I in the area nearby and on the staff at the Native Hospital there. And for the next few years I did visit with Ludwig a number of times. On at least one of these visits I recorded the tape of November 17, 83. And I have a few other notes, but no tape accompanying them, so most of what I say is dependent on those notes and mostly my memory. The listener should appreciate that Ludwig was 98 years old at the time the November tape was done. And you will notice how clear his voice is and how good his recall, even of details, such as the landing of the ship in Nome in 1910. There are some comments on the tape that, or remarks on the tape that I'd like to comment on. You'll notice that the selling of the Golovin mission reindeer herd was a very sensitive subject with Ludwig. And the background of that he does explain in that the mission needed to be moved from Golovin to a safer location away from the threat of floods. And an official of the church apparently had led him to believe that he could sell the reindeer, which he'd been taking care of himself with the help of the folks at the mission, and use the money for the move. However, as it turned out, apparently the reindeer were sold, and Japhet Lindeberg was in on the arrangement, and the money was given to the board in Chicago at the headquarters, and Ludwig didn't see any, and he was left in the lurch of trying to make this difficult move with only his own very limited resources. And now for some other things that Ludwig told me that are not on the tape. One of interest is his account of the diphtheria scare in Nome in the early 1900s. I think people were very uptight about epidemics, having been through very devastating epidemics earlier, the Great Sickness of the 1900 and the flu epidemic of 1919. Ludwig says he was in the office when some of the telegraph exchanges were made between the editor of the Nome paper and the New York paper. The person reporting said that he did not have much evidence of a real epidemic. There were 2 cases, two men sick, and their diagnosis was uncertain, as one can guess with the lab resources the doctor would have at that time. Anyway, the New York paper apparently were looking for a story, and they said that that was not a satisfactory report and give us some news. So finally the editor sent word that his wife was dying, and that was built into a threat to 10,000 people, although as Post points out there are only 2,000 living in Nome, and the diphtheria scare was on, and the dogs did actually run, and of course we do have the great Iditarod dog races now, so I don't want to detract from that great story, but anyway, that was Ludwig's account. He also told me about a trip that he and a couple of comrades took to Siberia on a boat, schooner that was on loan from the mission. Apparently they were going there to try to establish some mission activities, and he had all sorts of adventures with the officials in Siberia. Ludwig told me that he was born on October 2nd, 1885, which of course the family knows, at a place called Buriet, which on my very detailed map of Sweden is seen only as a half a dozen houses, about 15 kilometers, or about 6 English miles due north of Ludvika in Dalarna. I've been by there several times, but I didn't have this information at the time, and so I didn't stop and look for his place, and I don't know whether the family has found it or not. They probably could if they went back and looked. Ludwig said that there was a man, editor and photographer by the name of John Olof Schrader from Ludvika, Sweden, came and visited him once and wrote a pamphlet under the title of Grandpa. If the family have that, I would enjoy seeing a copy of it, either in Swedish or English, if it's still available. Ludwig also told me what he remembered of the so-called 3 Lucky Swedes who found the gold on Anvil Creek that started the gold rush, namely Japhet Lindeberg, Eric Lindeblum, who, by the way, came from a place very near where Ludwig did in Sweden, and John Brentesson. As is characteristic, perhaps, of anybody who lives to be over 100 years old, Ludwig had a good sense of humor, and there was often a twinkle in his blue eyes as he spoke. One time I asked him, how did you and your wife possibly take care of all those children with 40, 50 children at times, I gather, with so little resources as you had? And he looked at me and he held up these great big hams of hands and said, "I worked." On another occasion, just as I was finishing my visit, a nursing attendant came into the room with a little paper cup with some pills, and Reverend Ost, your medicines. And he put up his hand and said, no. And we went on talking, and I was watching what would happen out of the corner of my eye. And she stood there and was rather persistent. And finally he turned to her and says, "Take that junk out of here." And she was ordered out of the room and left. Anyway, it was getting late afternoon. He reached over and took a white shirt and a necktie out of his closet and dressed to go to dinner. So whatever it was, apparently wasn't critical to his survival when he was 100 years old. Well, so much for my comments. My wishes to the Ost family and descendants for very happy holidays here in December 1999. My phone number here in Homer is 907-235-6499, and my mailing address is P.O. Box 293, zip 99603, if you have any occasion to contact me. I enjoyed my visits and acquaintanceship with Ludwig, and I wish you all well. Thank you much.